Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. This week I'm going to be taking a look at an old classic of mine, that one being Sinead O'Connor's The Lion The Cobra. Now Sinead's kind of been in the news a little bit more recently than not, and I think that's partially because she's released a memoir recently, and also I think this particular album has reached some kind of anniversary, and I don't even want to do the math on how long it's been since this album's been out, but this album was released in 1987. You can figure it out for yourself. And certainly in 1987, what she was doing and what Sinead was about at the time and how she did it was really groundbreaking stuff. And it wasn't just in terms of her image that she was so successful, but also because of the musical statement that this album made. Certainly whenever I was walking around in high school back in the day, I was listening to a lot of progressive rock music and not very many female performers. Looking back on it, I'll be pretty open about that. I wasn't listening to a whole lot of women performers. But Sinead broke through, and I caught a glimpse of her, I think on 120 Minutes, singing her first release from this album, Mandica, and her vocal gymnastics and the super aggressive guitar that she had on that song really caught my attention right off the bat.
See how the black moon fades, soon I can give you my heart.
So it wasn't too long after that I picked up The Lion and the Cobra. And I distinctly remember walking around to my friends in choir. I had some choir friends. And I would have earphones and I would give it to them and be like, what is she doing? What's going on with this gal? And they're like, I don't know. It's pretty incredible. And her vocal prowess, the specific way that she sings with so much intensity on that song is even more pronounced throughout the course of The Lion and the Cobra throughout. Sinead O'Connor, if you hear her tale of it, cites among her main influences Peter Gabriel and Prince. And again, it's one of those situations where once you know that, you can definitely hear it. She definitely has this connection with the ethos of Peter Gabriel, his sort of open-ended experimental art pop style, but also the kind of attention to kind of details and small hooks in her music that define what Prince always was really good at. On top of that, you've got her very, identifiably Irish background. All of these major influences were being fueled by some childhood trauma that she was using. I don't think that she was working through the trauma on this album as much. It wasn't as much therapy as it was an expression. And ultimately, this character, this concept that she had for her music, is what holds those kind of disparate things together. Now, track to track, there's some songs in here, definitely like Mandica, and Put Your Hands on Me is another one that a lot of people probably know from this time, that are kind of straight ahead, funky rock songs, But then she has some very emotional moments on this album, not the least of which was the song Troy. For me, this was the kicker. When I caught wind of Troy, again, I was listening to a lot of Marillion at the time. Although I wouldn't call what Sinead O'Connor was doing on this album necessarily progressive rock. There's definitely some moments on there that are prog adjacent, I think. And definitely the song Troy is one of them.
The phoenix from the flame, I have learned I will rise, and you'll see me return, being what I am. There is no other Troy for me to burn.
There are many moments on The Lion and the Cobra where she's really redlining the recording process. And I remember being very flabbergasted by that at the time. I was like, she's in the studio and she's overdriving this mic. But come to find out, as I was researching this album, that this is a specific sound that Sinead was looking for. When she went in to do The Lion and the Cobra, she was hired out a producer who kept on trying to back off her voice and trying to make it sound a little bit less strident. But she would actually go out into her car, go outside, and practice finding the edges of what her voice could do so she could continually redline it. And then eventually went to the record company and said, this guy's holding me back. And ultimately produced the album entirely by herself, which for a person who is 19, 20 years old, and has never really produced an album before, is a huge accomplishment for this album to be as cohesive and as successful as it is. So on this album, you definitely have some straight ahead pop songs that were definitely radio ready. And then you have some more dramatic vocal songs that she does, like Troy, the opening track, Jackie. Great songs, but diametrically opposed to the two. And then interestingly too, there are some songs that kind of have the space between. And really what's interesting about these is these are a little bit more atmospheric and hazy. I remember for a long time, one of my least favorite songs in the album was the song called Just Call Me Joe. And I didn't really get that song at the time. I felt like it was just sort of a little bit of a throwaway closer. But looking back on it now in context, I see it as almost like a precursor to the shoegaze music that was going to be coming out in the early 90s, with My Bloody Valentine. The kind of whispered, light vocals buried in the background behind a huge wall of fuzzed out guitar. All the characteristics were kind of there, sort of predicting this. That would become a movement a little bit later on. And this is another way in which Sinead was incredibly forward-looking, not just in terms of the style, but really in terms of her image and what she was doing. I mean, in 1987, to come onto the scene with a shaved bald head, sell herself as a pop singer, was a huge statement. And not so odd now, but definitely in 87, to have somebody with that kind of an image was hugely individualistic and very, very brave. And it was her sort of take on this, as well as her outspoken attitude. Like the success in this album and her outspoken attitude was kind of poised her to really be the next big thing. I mean, she was starting to talk to the fans of Madonna, who kind of felt like the Madonna was starting to jump the shark a little bit. By the late 80s and the early 90s, Madonna was kind of getting into her whole sex erotica thing. And Sinead O'Connor, although definitely having her own sense of sexuality with what she was doing, was very diametrically opposed to Madonna, and challenged, I think, that in some ways. But also, I think that Sinead's musical sense and her vision for what she was doing, especially on the Lion The Cobra, really can't be overlooked.
Lay down my head at the end of my day. Nothing would please me better than I find that you're there when I'm
Now, I don't want to talk too much about the way in which Sinead's career kind of got dismantled a little bit later. That's not really my intent here. I really want to focus in on the greatness of this album. But I think it's also important to note that Sinead O'Connor's intent, although she was put forward as a pop singer, came out as a pop singer, she was also very young. I didn't think she really fully understood exactly what she was getting herself into. She has said in interviews that she ultimately didn't really want to be a pop singer that much. She ultimately wanted to be a protest singer. But not knowing exactly how to take that path, she found herself thrust into fame. And I don't necessarily think that fame sat with her super well. I think there's a sense that she had the same relationship with fame that Kurt Cobain would later on. But her solution to that was not to necessarily get, drawn into heavier drug addictions or anything. That wasn't her path, but definitely had an effect on her mental health, I think, in the long run. And there's a point a little bit later in her career where she took her desire to be a protest singer and kind of pushed it just to the edge of what was kind of acceptable at the time, A few years later, she would release I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, which had her biggest hit, Nothing Compares to You, on it. And she was booked to play a Saturday Night Live performance. And I remember when this happened, I was working at Blockbuster Music, and me and several other folks were watching her performance on Saturday Night Live. And at the end of it, she held up a picture of the Pope and tore it in half and was trying to bring attention to the child abuse in the Catholic Church. Mind you, this is 1991. And because of this incident, this was the first of several things that happened with Sinead going forward that caused her to ultimately be canceled, way before cancel culture became a thing these days. And her career never quite got back on track because of that, and stuff happened. Again, I don't want to get into all that stuff. But what I do think is really interesting is that this album shows Sinead being young and in her own way kind of optimistic. Not optimistic about the world, but about how she was going to go forward with her career and navigate her talent. So in a way, even though this album has a world weariness to it and a lot of passion and a lot of anger, there's also a certain innocence to it that really balances the whole thing out. And the end result is this album is very, very, I think, emotionally moving. I think it's also very impressive just artistically and super duper distinctive. I think that this album has aged incredibly well. It doesn't, to me, sound like an album that was released in 1987. And I was there. If you're a person who knows a little bit about Sinead O'Connor and you're curious or maybe you don't understand what all the hype is about, like why are we still talking about Sinead O'Connor if she hasn't made a really publicly visible album in, decades? Well, it's because of this album. If you were alive and listening to music between the years of 1987 and 1990, Sinead was the next big thing. And I also think that was well-deserved. Sometimes people get pushed into stardom for no reason beyond their looks or whatever else. But Sinead did it almost entirely due to her own vision and her own charisma and her own fortitude. And I think that this album really sums up that concept the best of any album that she ever released. So I highly suggest you check it out. If you've never checked out any of her stuff, this is the one to investigate. But that's all I have to talk about this album this time around and Sinead in general. So if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to it. Share it out with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify. I'll definitely put a track from the Lion The Cobra up over there. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Until then, I'll catch you on the flip side.